Hey again, guys. So this is part two, and I'm still here. I just checked that part one had rendered okay because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't getting cut off, because it's so annoying when you do like a 10 or 20 minute video and then all of a sudden it's not recorded for whatever reason. So where was I up to now? Yeah, trying to find my way in the dark. Um, at the time, I had done a lot of reading on game development and GameDev.net, GammaSutra.com, and a few other sites. And I'd come across Talk Engine. I don't think they are around anymore, but Talk was maybe a few guys remember it was a 3D and 2D engine, and I think they had them as like separate things, Talk and Talk 2D and then Talk 3D, and Talk was like my first leap into game engine territory, and it was amazing, like playing around with it, just being able to move these things so easily on a screen. I was like, wow, I can just drag this object into here. I can drag this controller like this, map some keys to this texture, and I can press keys and move it around on my keyboard. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Um, and I was like, wait, so why am I learning C++? Because really, because I remember I read a book on C++ game development as well, and they were teaching me stuff about how to actually create 3D objects using DirectX or something like that. I can't remember it exactly, but it would talked about, skinning a 3D object in the screen. So you'd have the coordinate for the first point, which would be like 0, 0, 0, 0, whatever, and then the second point, and you'd map that coordinate, and then the next point, and then it was talking about how to get a texture into that 3D object and then spin it around. And I was like, oh my god, this is taking ages. How do you make a game through this process? It doesn't make any sense. So every time I make a cube or a crate or something, I have to the developers have to create this from scratch every single time. It doesn't make any sense. Where is the visual stuff? Where is the editor? I didn't even know what an editor was at the time. I had no idea. But that sort of started to make sense in when it came to Talk. I was like, oh, this is a game engine. Oh, this is how it works. And so I started to build some basic prototypes there, and I had the idea of releasing in China, releasing an app to teach people how to learn English, because I was an English teacher, and it kind of made sense, and it was like a channel for to promote it and to sell it. And it was basically like you'd have the Chinese word on the left-hand side, and then you'd have to spell the word using the keyboard. I think you got money on the right-hand side whenever you got it correct. I think that was how it worked. Like, you'd have these falling objects. But it didn't have any kind of level system. There was no levels to that game. It was just one thing, and then when you spelt the word, it faded up to white. But that was just a plane. That was just a texture plane. That faded up to white and covered the game objects in the background. But the game objects were still active and doing their thing. So that I was still confused about how, to have a game flow, how to have the logo screen to the menu to the game start to game over and then loop it again once the player starts again. All of that was still really alien to me. I was just still learning basic concepts of animation and functions and function calls and different scripts as well. Was really confusing, global variables, private variables, or local variables, functions and arguments inside of the functions as well, return statements and all of that stuff, loops, for loops, switch statements. They were all really, that was kind of what I was trying to figure out, and I should have maybe started on something much more basic, like something which like Pong or something, because that's always a good thing to do, and that's always what I advise new developers is do the simplest game that you can think of, because if you try and make it big, you really You're going to have a lot of trouble. Get all of the concepts into a single game. Like the flow of the game, the physics, the UI, the experience, and then have a polished, finished product, the artwork, and so on. And just do that. So that was the first thing that I did, and I showed it to my friends, and they were like, "Oh, this is interesting, but you might want to change this and that." And they gave me some feedback. I'd also met a couple of other guys. One was a 3D Max modeler. He worked in a game company. He was actually one of my students. And he was teaching me how to use 3D Max, which again was just so alien to me. I think the problem I was having at that time, and that was around late 2006, 2007, was just that I didn't know what to build. That was the problem. I didn't know. I didn't have any clear direction in games. Like originally, I was doing programming, which was like a massive, thing to tackle. But then I defined it into games. But then I had to get from like this giant map into, okay, use a game engine. Okay, focus on this language. Okay, and get some focus. That didn't happen for a while. For a good couple of years, I really didn't know how to do things. I was just sort of building some 3D Max, looking at 3D Max scripting, messing around with Torque Engine, not being able to finish a game, having no idea how to sell the games, just zero idea. I actually called up a studio at that point in Shanghai as well. It was Spicy Horse. That's the guy, the studio that's owned by American McGee, who originally worked on Doom. I sent him an email and I said, "Hey, I'm a new developer in Shanghai, or I'm not a developer, I'm just a guy who wants to be in games. And, if you need any help, I'm willing to do it for free as well, and whatever. I just want to get in games and figure out what the heck is going on." But unfortunately, they weren't looking for anyone to do that at the moment, so I was like, oh, okay. I wandered into another studio called, I think it was Vicarian. That was it, Vicarian. It was an outsourcing studio here in Shanghai. So I don't think they did any full game development. I think they were mainly just doing artwork. And I just wandered in one day because they were actually on the same road where I was teaching in Shanghai. And I just said, "Hey, could I speak to the boss?" And they just said, "Sure, yeah, what about?" I said, "Well, I'm interested in working here, and I'd seen you online." And I met a guy called Xin Chung, I think his name was. And I was just talking about game development and what I did and what I was looking for. And I think at the time I was like even offering that for free as well. I just said, "If you want me to come in and teach some staff English, that's cool. I'm happy to take the time to speak English, to teach them English, and just learn the environment of games and figure out what's going on and try to get my foot in the door." Basically, that's what I was trying to do. And that didn't work out either. Unfortunately, they never called me back or anything. So yeah, that was a bit of a problem at that time. This was 2007, I believe, and I was really working hard to study as much as possible, to absorb as much information as humanly possible. The amount of reading and study I was doing was ridiculous. If I had put that much effort into my acting course, I would have done really well in the acting course, I suppose. Or if I'd put that much effort in school, I would have got all A's. The amount of just trying to absorb as much as possible. I was printing off websites, web pages, so that I could literally, guys, right, this is really nostalgic for me. This is a really nostalgic feeling. I remember reading and walking all the time. I just had my A4 paper, and you can imagine the busy streets of Shanghai, just everybody, walking towards you and shoving into you, and the crazy subway, and there's just me there with and I was just walking with my my piece of paper and my A4 sheet and just reading off the next thing, writing notes on this piece of paper as well. And I had my headphones on all the time as well, and I was always playing what's the game? Hitman. I was always playing the Hitman music in my headphones at this time, 2007. I remember it like vividly. I always had Hitman. I don't know if it was Contracts. It's the one. It's the game of Hitman where you go to the Hong Kong subway station, and I never owned that game, but I did have the soundtrack on my MP3 player. Not an iPod. This is pre-iPod. This is MP3 players, the little cheap ones. But I had it on my little MP3 player, and I was just listening to it all the time. And the track that I always listened to was the start track, but there was also that the Hong Kong subway one. And I don't know why am I talking about that so much. I think it was just because that has a really heavy memory for me of feeling like I was in sort of like another world in this exotic, crazy city metropolis, and just always sort of having my head down and traveling to and from work in the crazy Shanghai heat, and just trying to learn this thing that I had no idea about. I didn't really have any kind of mentor or guide at that time, and it was just it was kind of intense. And I'd come back to my apartment and I'd stay up all night just reading and trying to code and learn, and then go to work the next day and just continue learning all the time. So it was a really sort of intense period. I think a little after that time, I can't remember the exact date, but I got in contact with a lady who worked in Shanghai for Shanghai Multimedia Association, which is the company that I work with now, where my partner owns that company, and we now run PandaTap together. But years ago, I called them up and said, "Hey, I'm in Shanghai. I'm from England. I'm a teacher, and I'm interested in looking for some kind of job in games." And at the time, the lady Catherine, she'd said, "Oh, well, I'm actually leaving this position here to go and work at an outsourcing studio. So they might be interested in hiring you instead." So I said, "Oh, wow, that's great. I'll come to have a chat." And so I went to this the Shanghai Media Association, and I met with my partner, who is my partner now, and they said, "Oh, well, we help overseas companies connect with local companies for game development and outsourcing." And so it was kind of like an admin job, a BD job, and sort of like a bridge between overseas and local companies, and helping them to promote local companies as well. So that was kind of like my first step into the multimedia area. And at the time, I actually was still working as a teacher and also working this other media place. So I was sort of doing part-time there and then full-time at the other place. And so I had 2 jobs plus all of my study at the same time. So I was really, really working really hard at the time. And I was there for a few months working in this sort of like a BD position, and I met a few companies, game development companies, but I really didn't know what was going on, like in terms of like game development or what they were looking for. They were talking about Maya and Unreal Engine, and I was like, what the heck are they talking about? At the time, like, I'd heard about Unreal Engine, and I started to check that out as well. I downloaded a version of Unreal U3D or something, and I was going through the tutorials. But I always found Unreal to be really hard to find basic tutorials for. It just, all I wanted to do was build a real basic game, but they always had like this editor thing going on. They always had like, oh, this is how you build a level, this is how it's like kind of like how you'd build Unreal Tournament levels for Unreal Tournament. And it was really confusing because they had all of these different classes and the console, and I think it was Unreal Script as well, UScript, and that didn't make much sense. It was kind of like almost like modding, I think, in a way. It was like, but that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to build something from scratch. I remember it clearly. I didn't want to like create these 3D environments, which was cool. I actually did build a couple of levels in Unreal, and modeled. I actually built like a level, like a first-person shooter level. Modeled it and added lighting and ramps and exits and whatever, and it was good. It was really interesting, but it was still kind of not a developer thing. It was me still trying to figure out exactly what I was supposed to do. I didn't know what this was. I was just practicing with everything. So I'd done a bit of Talk, I'd done a bit of C++, I'd done a bit of Unreal, but I'd never actually built anything fully that was like a commercial product. So that was always a problem. I think maybe if I'd gone to university at that point, I would have had a much better chance. So anyway, so I was checking out a couple of engines, but it was starting to make sense a little bit now. How you build a game from start to finish. But with Unreal, I could never find a tutorial that just explained how to make a Pong game or some kind of like tutorial game from start to finish from scratch. Do you know what I mean? There was never... I couldn't find anything like that. I don't know, maybe other people could find it, but I was online and everything. I just could not find a decent tutorial. They were always talking about, what's the word? Deriving from a class. Like if you want to build a character, then you should derive from the character class, because then he's going to have his health and his abilities and his speed and his weapon, and a weapon would derive from this class. And I was like, okay, I get what that means, but I want to create my own thing from scratch. I was always about that. I was always about creating everything from scratch for some reason. I don't know why. C++ appealed to me because it was the basics. It was the ground. I don't know why I was so... kind of trying to get from the ground up. Why not start from an engine? I guess it's because if you build something from the ground up, you learn everything about it. If you build an engine and then a character and you learn everything, and you do everything, you learn it from the ground up and you learn everything. But that's a really long way to go around it, of course. You shouldn't have to do that as a developer. That's like an engine programmer job, or engine technician, whatever you'd call it. So anyway, I did this job for a few months in the association, and then my boss, who is my partner now, he said, "Hey, there's a company, an outsourcing company in Shanghai, who wants to have an interview with you. They're looking for an overseas BD person to help them to find clients for their outsourcing team in Shanghai." It was a full-time position, and so that was like my first job. You know what I mean? A big, official, full job into games, and that was that would have been around late 2007, because I remember the weather was freezing. And I'd been in Shanghai for less than a year at that point. So it happened kind of quickly. I'd gone into Shanghai, deciding that I wanted to do games in April of 2007. And then by the end of 2007, I was working in a game development or an outsourcing company for games. So that was pretty fast, though. That happened pretty fast. And that was my first sort of official job in the games industry. So I was really happy at that point, because up until that point it had really sort of been like this brick wall that I just couldn't enter. It was like this, how do you get a job in game development? I have no idea. Who do you call? Who do you speak to? What skills do you need? I just couldn't figure it out at all. I was kind of speaking with people and showing my enthusiasm, but it just wasn't happening. And so that was the first sort of foot in the door. Really, that was like my full body was inside of the games industry now. So so I'm going to talk about that in a moment, because my video is almost on 20 minutes, and I'm going to be back for part 3, guys. So I will speak to you all shortly. Bye bye.